Welcome to Echo and Ash, and thank you for tuning in to another original audio experience. Today, we are continuing our storyline titled Silent Breath. This is episode 3. Please sit back, relax, and let the story unfold.
The music swelling through the three-story atrium of the grand dining room was a lively, up-tempo jazz piece, perfectly designed to encourage the drinking of expensive champagne and the exchange of light-hearted vacation gossip. Women in sequined gowns and men in rented tuxedos laughed beneath the brilliant, multi-tiered crystal chandelier that served as the centerpiece of the Oceanic Serenade. At the captain's table, Thomas Sterling was mid-sentence, recounting a sanitized, charming anecdote about navigating the Mediterranean, when his first officer, a stiff-backed Brit named Davies, leaned over and whispered urgently into his ear. Sterling's smile remained frozen in place, a practiced mask of hospitality, but his eyes instantly hardened. He offered a polite, apologetic bow to the Silicon Valley executive seated to his right, excused himself, and followed Davies through a set of concealed wooden doors into a small, soundproofed service pantry just off the main floor. The moment the heavy doors closed, cutting the jazz music down to a muffled thump, Sterling snatched the wall-mounted telephone receiver from Davies. "This is the captain," Sterling snapped, his voice tight. "Dr. Vance, I am in the middle of the premier event of this voyage. You had better have a reason for demanding a halt to the Gala." "Captain, we are past the point of managing optics," Marcus Vance's voice crackled through the earpiece. The doctor did not sound panicked. He sounded hollowed out, entirely stripped of his usual bedside manner. "We have an active airborne outbreak moving through the ship's ventilation system. The dishwasher from the main galley just collapsed. We intubated him 3 minutes ago. The sous chef, Hector, is currently on high-flow oxygen, hovering at a saturation of 72%. And my head nurse just fielded distress calls from 8 different crew members on Deck 1. They are all presenting with the exact same symptom: rapid onset, silent hypoxia." Sterling gripped the edge of a stainless steel prep counter, his knuckles turning white. He stared at a rack of polished silver serving cloches. "Airborne? Marcus, you told me the original patient contracted this from an enclosed environmental exposure on land. You told me it wasn't human to human." "I was wrong, Thomas. Or the pathogen mutated, or the environment inside this ship, the recycled air and the low humidity, gave it exactly what it needed to aerosolize. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that it is in the HVAC system. It is blowing into the galleys, the crew quarters, and the passenger corridors right now. You need to shut down the public spaces immediately. Confine everyone to their cabins. We need to implement a full level 4 quarantine, or by tomorrow morning, I am going to have 100 people suffocating in the hallways." Sterling closed his eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. The weight of his command bore down on him, crushing and absolute. A level 4 quarantine meant the end of the cruise. It meant international headlines, plunging stock prices for the cruise line, and a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. But the alternative, a mass casualty event occurring while the band played on, was unthinkable. "Understood, Doctor," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into the cold, detached cadence of a naval officer in a crisis. "I will make the announcement. What are your immediate needs?" "I need the chief engineer," Marcus replied instantly. "I need to know if we can isolate the air handlers. And, Captain, I need you to contact the mainland. We are 1,000 miles from the nearest major port, but we need to declare a medical emergency and request immediate docking clearance and medevac support. I have exactly 5 ventilators on this vessel. 2 are already in use. I only have enough supplemental oxygen tanks to support maybe 30 people. Once those are gone, there is nothing I can do to keep them breathing." "I will contact Maritime Command," Sterling promised, hanging up the phone. He pushed back through the concealed doors, stepping out into the dazzling light and the cheerful noise of the atrium. He walked with a stiff, purposeful stride directly to the bandstand. He didn't ask for the microphone. He simply stepped up, caught the bandleader's eye, and drew a single finger across his throat. The jazz music staggered and died, a discordant screech of a saxophone echoing into the sudden, confusing silence. Over 1,000 faces turned to look at the man in the crisp white uniform. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Sterling began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a charming preamble. "I must ask for your immediate attention. Due to an escalating and severe medical situation involving an infectious respiratory pathogen, I am officially declaring a shipwide quarantine. The gala is concluded. All bars, casinos, pools, and theaters are closed. I am ordering every passenger to return to their stateroom immediately and remain there until further notice. This is not a drill, and this is not a request." A low, collective murmur of shock rippled through the crowd, like the sound of a distant wave breaking on rocks. A woman near the front dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound acting like a starter's pistol. Panic, sudden and electric, seized the room. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as people scrambled to their feet. Men grabbed their wives by the arm, and the polite, wealthy crowd instantly devolved into a frightened mob pushing toward the sweeping glass staircases and the elevator banks. Deep in the bowels of the ship, the situation was already transitioning from an emergency to a catastrophe. The medical bay, designed to handle minor accidents and the occasional heart attack, was entirely overrun. Dr. Vance and Nurse Elena Rostova moved through the brightly lit corridors like soldiers in a trench. The silence of the outbreak was the most unnerving part. Unlike a typical flu ward, where the air is filled with the cacophony of wet, violent coughing and the sounds of physical misery, the Oceanic Serenade's medical center was horrifyingly quiet. The patients sitting in the waiting area chairs, propped up against the walls or lying on the examination tables, were simply fading. They were crew members in grease-stained aprons, security guards in their dark uniforms, and a handful of older passengers who had been brought down by their terrified spouses. Their faces were uniformly pale, their lips tinged with that dreadful telltale blue. They stared ahead with wide, exhausted eyes, their chests rising and falling in rapid, incredibly shallow increments. They were drowning in the open air. "Doctor!" Elena called out, her voice tight with strain. She was adjusting the nasal cannula on a young woman from the housekeeping staff. "We just tapped into the last of the portable E-cylinders. I have 20 patients on supplemental oxygen. The main liquid oxygen reserve for the trauma bays is reading at 60% capacity. If we hook anyone else up to the wall, we are going to drain the entire ship's supply in less than 48 hours. Marcus wiped a layer of cold sweat from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. He looked at the row of suffocating people. Triage. It was the hardest part of emergency medicine, the cold, brutal mathematics of deciding who gets the life-saving resources and who is left to fend for themselves. "Keep the flow rates as low as possible," Marcus ordered, his voice hollow. "Titrate them down to keep their saturation exactly at 88%, not higher. We cannot afford to make them comfortable, we can only afford to keep them alive. If they can maintain 85 without the tank, take them off and give it to someone who is crashing." The automatic doors hissed open, and Elias Cobb, the chief engineer, strode into the medical bay. Cobb was a large, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing a dark blue boiler suit smeared with hydraulic grease. He carried a rolled-up set of massive architectural blueprints under his arm. "Marcus," Cobb said, his deep, gravelly voice echoing in the quiet room. "The captain said you needed to see me about the HVAC. What the hell is happening down here?" Marcus grabbed Cobb by the elbow and pulled him into his office, slamming the glass door shut to block out the stares of the dying patients. Elias, the pathogen is airborne. It's moving through the vents. The dishwasher who collapsed, he works directly beneath the main intake for the galley. The virus is riding the air currents. Can you shut the system down? Can you isolate the air handlers? Cobb unrolled the blueprints on Marcus's desk, the thick paper flattening out to reveal a dizzying, complex schematic of colored lines representing the ship's vascular system of ductwork. Shut it down? Cobb repeated, staring at the doctor as if he were insane. Marcus, we are sailing near the equator. The ambient temperature outside is 85 degrees with 90% humidity. If I shut off the HVAC, the interior of this ship becomes a steel oven. The windowless cabins on decks 4 through 7 will hit 110 degrees in less than 3 hours. You'll have 2,000 people dying of heat stroke and dehydration before tomorrow morning. Then stop recirculating the air, Marcus countered, slamming his hand down on the blueprint. The system pulls air from the cabins, cools it, mixes it, and blasts it back out. It's taking the virus from one sick person and sharing it with 20 healthy ones, switched to 100% outside air. Cobb ran a thick, calloused hand over his bald head, leaving a streak of black grease on his scalp. The chillers aren't designed to process 100% hot, humid marine air continuously. They are designed to cool air that is already somewhat conditioned. If I open the exterior dampers all the way and shut off the return vents, the compressors will run at maximum load. They will overheat and trip the breakers. We might get 12 hours before the entire cooling system burns out permanently. Give me the 12 hours, Marcus pleaded, leaning heavily against the desk. Give me 12 hours of clean air. If we keep recirculating the air from the isolation rooms, this entire medical bay will be a morgue by dawn. Cobb looked out through the glass door at the young housekeeping girl, watching her chest struggle in tiny, pathetic spasms. He set his jaw. 12 hours. I'll make the switch. But Marcus, when those chillers fail, we are going to be trapped in a floating sauna, and there won't be a damn thing I can do to fix it. While the engineers battled the mechanical lungs of the ship, Captain Sterling was fighting a losing war on the bridge. The communications center, bathed in the dim red glow of the night ops lighting, was a hub of frantic, desperate activity. Sterling stood over the shoulder of his communications officer, staring at the digital maps tracking their position off the western coast of South America. Valparaiso Port Authority is on the line, Captain, the officer said, pressing a headset tightly to his ear. I have their director of maritime health. Put him on the speaker, Sterling ordered. A burst of static filled the room, followed by a heavily accented, stern voice. Oceanic Serenade, this is Director Silva, Valparaiso Port Authority. We have received your Level 4 medical declaration and your request for emergency docking. Captain, you are currently stating you have an unidentified, highly infectious airborne pathogen resulting in severe acute respiratory failure. That is correct, Director, Sterling said, leaning closer to the microphone. We have multiple crew members critically ill, 2 intubated, and dozens more showing early symptoms. Our medical supplies are rapidly depleting. We need immediate medevac helicopters for the critical patients, and we need clearance to dock at your quarantine pier to offload the remaining passengers into a controlled medical environment. There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the radio. The silence stretched out, filled only by the low hum of the ship's radar equipment and the steady, dark wash of the ocean outside the bridge windows. Negative Oceanic Serenade, Silva's voice finally returned, completely devoid of sympathy. Your request to dock is formally denied. Sterling slammed his fist onto the communications console. Denied, Director, under international maritime law, a vessel in distress. Under international maritime law, a sovereign nation has the right to refuse entry to a vessel that poses a catastrophic biological threat to its mainland population. Silva interrupted, his voice raising in volume. Captain, we don't know what you have on that ship. We don't have the containment facilities in this port to handle 4,000 potentially infected individuals. You are not a cruise ship anymore. You are a biological hazard. Then send the helicopters, Sterling yelled, his usual composure entirely shattered. Take the critical patients. Take the people who are suffocating right now. If the pathogen is airborne, sending flight crews into your medical bay is a suicide mission. They would bring the infection directly back to our hospitals, Silva stated coldly. You are ordered to alter your heading. You are to remain in international waters, maintaining a minimum distance of 100 nautical miles from the coast. We are contacting the World Health Organization and your cruise line's corporate headquarters to determine a protocol. Until a global response is coordinated, you are to remain isolated at sea. Do not approach the coastline, Captain. If you cross into our territorial waters, you will be intercepted by the Naval Coast Guard. May God be with your crew. Valparaiso out. The radio clicked, followed by the steady, dead hiss of static. Sterling slowly stood up, staring out the massive reinforced windows of the bridge. The ocean was an endless, terrifying void. They were completely alone. The invisible killer was moving through the very air they breathed. Their cooling systems were on a 12-hour countdown to total failure, and the world had just locked the door and thrown away the key. The ship sailed on into the dark, a glittering billion-dollar prison of the damned.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the story, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for the continuation of this series as the crew formulate a plan to counter the virus. Until then, stay safe, and thanks for listening.